help if we turn the microphone on. Such tricks hath strong imagination, that if it would but apprehend some joy, it comprehends some bringer of that joy. Or in the night, imagining some fear, how easy is a bush supposed a bear. Everything that Theseus says is true. The imagination has all of these properties. But at the same time, imagination is and can be true to nature. It can even be part of the creation, the stuff behind the creation, provided that the imagination does not go awry in serving the lower nature. The imagination is transforming things. All of our world around us is a consequence of imagination. And if you say that there are false imaginations, that just means incorrect thoughts. It doesn't mean that the imagination itself is at fault. But how well we develop it as a tool. It's all the same imagination. You can't have it two ways. You can't say that the imagination is a bad thing, as Theseus tries to do. Theseus, in this case, is very interestingly in the line that fortunately was not on the tape. Yes. Lovers and madmen have such seething brains, such shaping fantasies that apprehend more than cool reason ever comprehends. There are people who believe that a picture is worth 1,000 words, and that the imagination is the way that the greater reality is carried. There are other people that are invisibilists. And the invisibilists believe that the invisible truth is the truth, and that imagination is just an embellishment. Imagination is the completion of invisible truth, or imagination is what holds the fact of an experience long enough for the invisible reason to understand it. So we have here the statements between Theseus and Hippolyta, a struggle between left and right brain people, between visual and non-visual people. The unusual thing is that Shakespeare turns it all around in Hippolyta's speech that follows right after. Who would like to read Hippolyta? Tinny, you want to try it?
But all the story of the night told over, and all their minds transfigured so together, more witnesseth than fancy's images, and grows to something of great constancy, but howsoever strange and admirable.
See, it turns out that Theseus, who speaks for logic and for inner meaning and not the outer form, doesn't possess it. But Hippolyta actually does. She gets to the crux of the argument. It can hardly be a hallucination or some other psychic aberration if it isn't a personal experience. If everybody's having the same experience and they're reporting it independently, and those connections of all the independent observations agree with each other, it doesn't sound at all irrational to me. It sounds more like Theseus, like many skeptics, is afraid of losing his worldview. And as a consequence, he refuses to let go. This brings us to one of the themes for the night. I'm just going to introduce it right now, and we're going to talk about it more toward the end of the evening. and that is the question of objectivity. Some philosophers put forth the notion that there is no objectivity, and that each and every one of us has a subjective point of view, and the only objectivity that would be if all of the subjective points of view were united into a whole. That whole would then indicate the total objective experience, and everything else would be partial, and because partial, it would be from a point of view, and would have to therefore be subjective. At this point, the other two couples join in, and Theseus asks for what entertainment is available. We're in Act 1 at the very beginning of it. We're down around line 44. Paul has volunteered to read Theseus' speech, The Battle of the Centaurs.
The battle with the centaurs to be sung by an Athenian eunuch to the harp. Well, none of that. That have I told my love in the glory of my kinsman Hercules. The riot of the tipsy Bacchanals, tearing the Thracian singer in their rage. That is an old device, and it was played when I was from Thebes, come last a conqueror. And the thrice three muses mourning for the death of learning, late deceased in vagary. That is some satire, keen and critical, not sorting with a nuptial ceremony. A tedious, brief skein of young Pyramus and his love Thisbe, a very tragical mirth. Merry and tragical, tedious and brief. That is, hot ice, wondrous strange snow. How shall we find the concord of this discord?
Theseus is, in this act, very much different than the Theseus in all of the previous acts. In this act, despite the fact that he doesn't like the imagination, he shows amazingly good taste, because his statements about each of these things is a very positive statement. The next statement, down along 89, the kinder we to give them thanks. If you want to read that one also.
The kinder we.
Yeah.
The kinder we to give them thanks for nothing. Our sport shall be to take what they mistake, and what poor duty cannot do. Noble respect takes it might, not merit. Where I have come, great clerks have proposed to greet me with premeditated welcomes. Where I have seen them shiver and look pale, make periods in the midst of sentences, mottled their practiced accent in their fears, and in conclusion, dumbly have broken off, not paying me a welcome. Trust me, sweet, out of this silence yet I pricked a welcome, and in the modesty of fearful duty I read as much as from the rattling tongue of saucy and audacious eloquence. Love, therefore, and the tongue-tied simplicity, in least speak most to my capacity.
Theseus is doing something really interesting here. In a way, this is a statement of noblesse oblige, that if you are in a position of nobility, you have the duty to shine upon your subjects, not for them as some son that, like they need you or something of that order, but more it is your duty to shine on them so that they can grow like plants grow. And he very much senses that responsibility. He says, even in their mistakes, we're going to find something good. We'll have fun at the same time, but in their mistakes, we're going to find something good. And because they are genuine people, and because they are working from their own conscience and their own duty, it's going to be good. They're going to have something to say. So it's a very positive statement that Theseus is making here. Now, at this point, since I am somewhat ill, I don't think I want to spend a whole lot of time reading through all of the parts. I don't know. I don't know what to say on this. Let's go ahead and try anyway. Would somebody like to read Bottom's part as the prologue? Larry, would you like to do that?
I'm not sure where we...
The prologue comes in around 109. If we offend, it is with our good will.
If we offend, it is with our good will, that you should think we come not to offend, but with good will. To show our simple skill, that is the true beginning of our end. Consider then we come but in despite. We do not come as minding to content you. Our true intent is, all for your delight. We are not here, that you should be here repent you. The actors are at hand, and by their show you shall know all that you are like to know.
It's interesting what follows. Theseus is truly noble. He says, this fellow does stand upon good points. His poetry is somewhat hokey, but so are my puns. But he does some interesting things, the way he treats beginning and end, or especially the double entendre on end. So there really are good things, and Theseus is seeing them. On the other hand, Lysander, he said, he hath rid his prologue like a rough colt. He knows not to stop. A good moral, my lord, it is not enough to speak, but to speak true. And Hippolyta comes within his speech. Indeed, he hath played on this prologue like a child on a recorder, a sound, but not in government. All right, let's go down to the next statement by the prologue. Gentles.
Gentles, perchance you wonder at this show, but wonder on till truth make all things plain. This man is Pyramus, if you should know. This beauteous lady Thisbe is certain. This man with lime and rust cast doth represent Wall, that vile wall which did these lovers sunder. And through Wall's chink, poor souls, they are content to whisper, at which let no man wonder. This man with lantern, dog, and bush of thorn presenteth moonshine. For if you will know, by moonshine did these lovers think no scorn to meet at Nimbus' tune, there to woo. This grisly beast, which Lion hides by name, the trusty Thisbe, coming first by night, did scare away, or rather, did affright. And as she fled, her mantle she did fall, which Lion vile with bloody mouth did stain. Anon comes Pyramus, sweet youth and tall, and finds his trusty Thisbe mantle slain. Whereat, with bloody blameful blade, he bravely broached his boiling bloody breast, and Thisbe, tearing in mulberry shade, his death slew and died. For all the rest, let Lion, moonshine, wall, and lovers twain at large discourse, while here they do remain.
We see, it's again exaggerated, but not without something positive to say. Who'd like to read Pyramus down along 179? Pyramus is bottom. Nobody wants to read Pyramus. Okay. O grim looked at night, O night with hue so black, O night which ever art when day is not, O night, alack, alack, alack. I fear my Thisbe's promise is forgot. O thou, O wall, O sweet, O lovely wall, that standeth between her father's ground and mine. O thou wall, O sweet and lovely wall, show me thy chink to blink through with mine. So he opens the fingers up and says, thanks, courteous wall, Jove shall shield thee for this. But what see I? No Thisbe do I see, O wicked wall, through whom I see no bliss. Cursed be thy stones for thus deceiving me. It's a little bit overplayed. He continues on and says, no, in truth, sir, he should not. Deceiving me is Thisbe's cue. She is to enter now, and I am to spy her through the wall. You shall see it will fall pat, as I told you, yonder she comes. Let's jump down to the next Pyramus statement. I see a voice. Now will I to the chink to spy, and I can hear my Thisbe's faith. Thisbe. Now, at first this seems like comedy, because it seems like he's confusing the senses and the powers that are given by the senses. He sees a voice and hears a vision. This hasn't been with Bottom all along. He does get some things backwards, as all weavers get things backwards from looking at the back side of the rug. But what has happened is that he has developed, as a consequence of his Eleusinian initiation, which we talked about last time. I'll have to get you a tape because it was a reasonable talk. He's developed a more total kind of vision, and the effects are still lingering with him. He's kinesthetic, such that the senses overlap, and he understands the whole and just has a hard time putting it all in words. Words can never really seem to keep up with what the spirit senses. And I'll look at a few more of Theseus' statements along around 2:13. Hippolyta says, this is the silliest stuff that ever I heard. Theseus says, the best in this kind are but shadows, and the worst are no worse, if imagination amend them. So now, this is interesting in it that he's flipped now, and now he's all in favor of the imagination, where at the beginning of the act he was against it. And as a consequence, as often happens in couples, she flips then, and she says, it must be your imagination then, and not theirs. And then Theseus says, if we imagine no worse of them than they of themselves, they must pass for excellent men. Here come two noble beasts in, a man and a lion. There's a bit of humor there. Who'd like to read Lysander, and I'll read Theseus, and who'd like to read Demetrius? Along a line 231. Who's Lysander? Who's going to be Lysander? Larry, you want to be Lysander? This lion is a very fox. Oh. It's about 3 paragraphs ahead after the lion has come in.
Oh, yeah. This lion is a very fox for his valor.
True, and a goose for his discretion.
Not so, my lord, for his valor cannot carry his discretion, and the fox carries the goose.
His discretion, I am sure, cannot carry his valor, for the goose carries not the fox. It is well, leave it to his discretion, and let us listen to the moon. I just mentioned this passage in passing, because this is another one of those things that has me shaking my head. Despite the argument of carrying the burden of an argument and what carries it, the fox and goose is one of the famous constellations. It's right at the base of the Northern Cross. That is at the head of Cygnus. And this is again one of those things that I suspect that there might be something encoded there, but maybe not. I'll read bottom as Pyramus here, jumping way ahead to line 300 and 307. Pyramus is about to die, and he says, "O wherefore, nature, didst thou lions frame?" That's the same question that William Blake asks several centuries later. "Since lion vile hath here deflowered my dear, which is, no, which was the fairest name that lived, that loved, that liked, that looked with cheer. Come, tears confound, out sword and wound. The pap of Pyramus, I that left pap where the heart doth hop. Thus die I, thus. Now am I dead, now am I fled. My soul is in the sky. Tongue, loose thy light. Moon, take thy flight. Now die. It's just a matter of doing things over again and again. And I think we've done enough of that because I don't know how long I'm going to be able to hold up tonight. So let's talk about one of our little sub-themes that's going to follow us into the last play in this series. In A Midsummer Night's Dream and Hamlet, our first play this fall, there is a play within a play. So we will have the opportunity to look at how the technique is used from two points of view. In this point of view that we're going to address tonight, we're going to take it in the context of what is going on. The players are watching themselves play their roles, and in the self-consciousness of their watching, they become so self-conscious that they have to make all of these prologues for fear that they'll be misunderstood or that their acting will affect people too much. So they have, in the self-consciousness of playing a role other than their person, they have something of a once-removed vantage. The nobles are also removed. They're watching their educated people, and they're no doubt sitting up above the players, and they're looking down watching, and they have also a once-removed view that is even more once removed from that of the players. Then this is a play within a play itself, which brings us as the audience into a very keen self-conscious awareness that there is this relationship of one thing being overshined or overshadowed by another, and that by yet another. And that is one of the central principles in all mysticism. It is called the principle of analogy. And it was stated by a classicist and alchemist in about, I believe, the 6th century A.D., a Roman alchemist that said, "As above, so below, what has gone before in heaven will follow after on earth. Know this and rejoice." It is a wonderful device to use in a play because we can apply to ourselves and we can see things with a sense of proportion. If we watch somebody watching somebody else, we can watch ourselves watching both. And we see the truth as it's seen by the hard-handed players, and we see it as it is seen by the haughty aristocrats, and we see it as though we were gods. Now, that's a really, really wonderful way to look at things. If we can take this as an open-ended principle, then we can see our lives as part of something much bigger. We can see our lives as living out something of a drama of cosmic proportion. And that sense of proportion is really important, because it's just exactly the way we see it in the play. Because too often, if we're just living our lives as our lives alone, we are blowing things out of proportion. But when we can see them in a larger sense, we can see that we're sometimes making a big fuss about something that isn't worthy of a big fuss. It's like much ado about nothing. And sometimes, if we're too vague about things, we miss significant details. So the law of proportion goes both ways. If you remember the principle of proportion, where you make analogous triangles from geometry class, the little triangle is replicated in the greater triangle. And the details and what occurs with the little triangle also happens in the greater. And this gives us a sense not of a blasé, hey, I can be relaxed because there's something bigger, but it gives us a sense of a rigor that carries right along with the proportion. And this technique is used by Shakespeare almost like no other playwright has done, and it always has this wonderful effect. The nobles laugh at the simplicity of the players, and they don't note their own simplicity. So we can see that sometime when we get that bigger point of view, we may have a puffed up view of ourselves. And so there are all sorts of little things in the idea. Oh boy. I'm just not clear. I'm going to have to skip on some of this. So this principle opens for us to a higher life. And I don't think one has to go to a play in order to realize this principle. Because we have this very same thing that happens in a living way in our lives. If we are tied up in our own petty competitiveness, we try to claw and scratch our way to the top, and we take anything that is a doubting of us in the slightest, or even sometimes a statement of fact about us, we take it as a slight, and we, placed in the same position, tend to become critical. We like to pride ourselves in our sophistication, just like the nobles are patting themselves on the back. And I've gone to churches where people pride themselves on how good their meditations are, and I didn't think they were that good. And any time that you're in that position, that you don't see things with a perspective, and you don't have the self-consciousness that you have when you have this principle of analogy very at the front of your mind, all of these things are likely to happen. We see a lot of this in institutions of learning. It seems that people who are professors or are becoming professors, if you go to some of their parties, for example, you find a lot of erudition, but it's all couched in that same kind of clawing criticism, like we're so bright and we can see how bad it all is. And it's again because there isn't that same kind of simplicity at the very bottom of the proportional tree or the proportional triangle that we have in this play. We have bottom as Thisbe and all of the other players who have not, exactly as Thesis says, they have not lost their genuineness because they have not lost their simplicity. And so the principle shows very clearly. I think one of the best places in life to understand this principle and get a hold of this principle in life, to get a reading on ourselves and on the true nature of reality with that very accurate sense of proportion, is in the passing of generations. When we are young, especially in our society, our parents and everyone around us makes a big deal of us. We become the center of attention. And by the time we become young adults, we're full of ourselves. And we can think only about our lives, our events, what's happening to us. And somewhere along the line we realize that we're inadequate in and of ourselves alone, and to fulfill ourselves we take complementation in partners. And that becomes fruitful. And then a wondrous thing happens. In the watching, in the simplicity of a child, one sees how one has become what they are all the way from childhood. And immediately the self-consciousness becomes almost desperately strong in its importance. So that we don't want to make any mistakes with our kids. And we put way too much into it. But then our kids get off on their own and they have their children. And that then produces the same situation that we have with regard to the play and the play within the play. Again, we see the simplicity of the new generation. But we also do not discontinue watching our children. And we are reborn again. And we are reborn again because we're watching the children watch their children. And that is tremendously liberating. The ability to become an elder statesperson and the ability to look at things with a grander wisdom means that there has to be some ability to step out or to disassociate from too much being tied into a role. So both the youngest generation has a kind of freedom in its innocence, and the oldest generation has a kind of freedom in that it understands the whole process in a larger and larger sense. I think this is one of the reasons why religion is such a big thing among older people, is that they have watched, and they have watched the watching, and that has freed them up, and in a teleological sense, they have a grand understanding of how proportion and perspective work throughout society. The generations aren't quite as open-ended, but even applying the principle to history and cycles of history and how things get passed down from generation to generation does hit very close to home, and it brings us to a very broad understanding. All right, let's finish up reading the play, and then we have some heavy topics tonight. Would someone like to read Puck coming in with the broom? Jerry, you want to read Puck? Oh. I think next fall I'm going to have to get in a handful of books that I can pass around. Bob Victor needs to wake up. He can read Puck. Tinny, hand a book back to him. I will not tolerate sleeping. I know that I drone on, but I'm not going to allow it. Now the hungry lion. Oh wait, I'm sorry. Yes, now the hungry lion roars.
And the wolf howls the moon, whilst the heavy plowman snores, and with weary task foredone. Now the wasted brands do glow, while the screech owl, screeching loud, puts the wretch that lies in woe in remembrance of a shroud. Now it is the time of night, that graves all gaping wide. Every one lets forth his sprite, in the churchway path do glide. And we fairies that do run, by the triple Hecate's team, for the presence of the sun, following darkness like a dream, now our frolic. Not a mouse shall disturb this hallowed house. I am sent with broom before, to sweep dust behind the door.
All right. Who wants to be Oberon? Jerry, you want to be Oberon? Oh. If I got to stand up here and make a fool of myself week after week by making mistakes along the way, everybody else gets a chance.
To the house give glimmering light by the dead drowsy fire, every elf and fairy sprite, hop as light as bird from briar, and this ditty after me sing and dance internally.
First rehearse your song by rote, to each word a warbling note. Hand in hand with fairy grace, we will sing and bless this place.
Now until the break of day, through the house each fairy stray, to the best bride bed will we, which by us shall blessed be, and issue there create, ever shall be fortunate. So shall all the couples three, ever true and loving be, and the blots of nature's hand shall not in their issue stand. Never mole, hair lip, not scar, nor mark prodigious, such as are despised in nativity, shall upon the children be. With the field do consecrate every fairy tale his gate, and each several chamber blessed. To this palace with sweet peace, and the owner of it blessed, ever shall its safety rest. Trip away, make no stay, meet me all by break of day.
If we shadows have offended, think but this, and all is mended. That you have but slumbered here, while these visions did appear, and this weak and idle theme, no more yielding but a dream. Gentles, do not reprehend, if you pardon we will mend, and as I am an honest Puck, if we have unearned luck, now to escape the serpent's tongue, we will make amends ere long. Else the Puck a liar call, so good night unto you all. Give me your hands if we be friends, and Robin shall restore amends.
Now, this might just seem like a quaint, emotion-stirring ending, but it is not. If people live basically loving lives, and they try to live in harmony with nature, and especially if there are house plants, one is very likely to attract household fairies. This is a common thing. It's been known for hundreds of years. Clairvoyants have seen them. Even once in a while, the vibrations in here are nice enough so that there are fairies, which is why I'm trying to put in more plants. I figure maybe I can attract a few more to even things out a little bit. Fairies learn by associations with humans. They don't have a self-apprehending self-consciousness, but they do pick things up by a kind of etheric induction. They don't know exactly what's going on. They couldn't design a computer, for example, but they get the gist of what is going on, provided it isn't too cerebral. So, since they get the gist, they learn by mimicry, the most fundamental kind of learning principle of all. Therefore, if there are chores that are repeated, and a person really gets into doing chore, like if you sweep the floor to get the floor swept, and if you cook to nurture people, if you wash the dishes regularly to keep things clean, this is literally understood by fairies. And they will do a monkey see, monkey do kind of conscious thing. So it's not uncommon to see a fairy sweeping, except in this store. I have to take that back. I have a very good person that sweeps the store out regularly. In fact, polishes it regularly. They are exactly as this speech says, or as these speeches say, when Oberon is giving the commands, they are capable of cleansing the etheric atmosphere, provided that it is not too overly polluted, and provided that it is not repeated. For example, sometimes when people have undergone relationships and they have intermingled their vital bodies in a way that gives them power over each other almost like a hypnotist, they can do great harm to each other in the course of a breakup. And the fairies are capable of cleansing those kinds of connections, but only once. And so, provided things aren't too nasty, the fairies can help you cleanse your atmosphere. They do like music, they do like light, and especially they like living things around. I don't suspect that there are many barroom fairies, but there may be entities of another sort living there. Also, since fertility and gestation, the fertility is brought about directly by the angels. The placing of the seed atoms of the physical and etheric bodies into the sperm and ovum, respectively, is an activity that is done by the angels. And angels carry things out through the ethers and through the agency of the fairies. So the whole period of gestation, especially if one is a peaceful, loving, beneficent individual, that mother is surrounded by fairies, and the fairies do the gestatory work. It doesn't mean to imply, when it talks in here about making perfect babies with no birthmarks or deformities or anything like that, it doesn't mean to say that the fairies can take all of that away. We still do have destiny, and we still are responsible for our past destiny. But environment does count for a lot. And sustaining an environment of love and harmony, something that is procreation, is something that will, in fact, produce a healthier child. Sometimes, let's see, where are we here? I go off. Children that we are to have reborn to us are a matter usually of destiny. And if we and the children have not, in previous interactions, in previous rebirths, been kind or positive toward each other, we can indeed have a situation where there have to be distorted children born, or children that have a terrible upbringing. As an act of freedom, we can break that. Parents can freely choose to treat each other lovingly and treat a child lovingly, and give that child in love and wisdom what it would have only learned through hardship and abuse. But it has to be bilateral. If the parents change, for example, and a child, the incoming entity that is the child, does not change and has to learn by harsh experience, very often a child dies in death. And the parents go on to another kind of living. All right. Now, we have housekeeping of our own to do. We have several topics. Last time we spoke as much as we could about the Eleusinian mysteries, and we left some loose ends. And we'll use them as a segue to get to our major topic. And that is, the loose end that we most have standing out is the topic of the three marriages. In symbology, marriage has many different meanings which work in different ways. For example, in some instances, marriage represents the fusion of two very different things and the struggle that is necessary to bring a unity to disparate elements. It's not clear that that applies in the three marriages that we have here. There have been some struggles, but the differing qualities of the members of each of the three couples is not really very clearly known. These are horizontal marriages. That is, they are between people of equal status. And all of the three marriages in this play that happen simultaneously are marriages among equals. So they're horizontal. There are vertical marriages in mythology. Zeus sometimes marries humans. We talked about that a few years ago, about 5 or 6 years ago. But there are other kinds of vertical marriages. One example of a vertical marriage is the alchemical marriage, wherein the human marries a divine mate from heaven, the guardian angel. That is the divine self that comes down, and there is then an eternal union, and we no longer struggle within ourselves because we promise to love, honor, and obey the higher self, and there is then a full, non-divorceable marriage. These marriages in this play are clearly not vertical, because there's not even any class difference between anyone. But there is a kind of horizontal marriage that does help at least me to understand the idea that is suggested to me by this play. Often, marriages of a horizontal nature spiritually represent matching qualities. And in such cases, there is usually another bond that makes the horizontal closeness much closer. For example, Zeus marries his sister, so that in the unconscious nature, they are brother and sister. But in the volitional consciousness, they address each other as husband and wife, meaning to say that then both on the conscious and the unconscious level, they are in union. And this is the kind of marriage that we're thinking of. It's very much like when we spoke, I think it was about 7 or 8 years ago, when we talked about Siegfried. Sigmund and Sieglinde, who are brother and sister, marry, and from them comes Siegfried the truth seeker. In each case of this kind of horizontal marriage, it is not the fusion of two very different things. There is a character complement. And the character complement is as strong as the gender complement. The two matching horizontal parts are parts of the same thing. And they're much more like complementing signs of the zodiac. Aries is perfectly complemented by Libra, and Libra by Aries. When this kind of marriage occurs in our human reality, but especially in the spiritual world where the nature of marriage has a very spiritual meaning, it is like a re-realization of a former unity. It is like when one meets one's complement and comes together, it is like a remembrance of a whole that had been there at one time, and with this complete and perfect complementation, that unity is now restored. And in this regard, the marriage of this kind is something like a homecoming. You're coming home to someone, to your counterpart, who is like your other self, and it's like talking to yourself all together. In our play, it is a matter of coming out of confusion and coming to a harmony and a union that is past differences. And then there is that complementation. In astrology, there are several kinds of homecomings. For instance, there is the conjunction of planetary opposites, such as, for example, the conjunction of Mars and Venus, which is almost classic to what we're speaking of. It's a kind of homecoming. The most common kind of homecoming astrologically is when a planet comes to one of its special stations. It's a planet with itself. It comes to terms with itself. Each planet has two special stations where it feels at home. The most significant of these stations is the sign of rulership or of essential dignity. The planet is most itself when it comes back to its own sign, and it is most at home there. Each planet also has a place of a special home feeling, and that is called exaltation. And when a planet returns to its place of exaltation, it is a homecoming to some very special trait that it has had all along, but it has had no opportunity to express. A very good example is Venus coming into Pisces, where the quality of sacrifice, that is a very special quality of love, can be expressed by Venus in Pisces as in no other place. Now, triple weddings, even in June, are not common events, and neither are cosmic homecoming opportunities. There are only 3 such possibilities on the zodiac, and they are all found in the watery signs. In Cancer, we have the moon ruling, Jupiter in exaltation, and Neptune in exaltation. In Scorpio, we have Mars ruling, we have Pluto ruling, and we have Uranus in exaltation. And in Pisces, we have Jupiter ruling, Neptune ruling, and Venus in exaltation. Those are the only 3 possible triple weddings or triple homecomings. However, since dual rulerships are a transitional thing, and eventually the octave planet takes over completely, this leaves only one place where there can be a triple wedding, a triple homecoming, and that is Cancer. As we have seen, the sun enters Cancer at Midsummer Night. Now, I would like to be able to say that each of the couples stands for one of the 3 potential homecomings, but I can't. To my knowledge, there is insufficient character development in Demetrius and Helena, Lysander, and Hermia, and Theseus, and Hippolyta. You can't say that one couple is like Neptune, one is like Jupiter, and one is like the moon. Neither is there any mythological conclusion to substantiate that there is such a connection. One can say some things about Theseus and Hippolyta, and we'll do that in just a moment. In the play, there are several Neptunian references, but they refer more to the fairies, which brings out the other triplicity in the play. There are 3 subplots at 3 levels. We have what Shakespeare calls the hard-handed mechanicals, we have the fairies, and we have the nobles. And it is reasonable to believe that each of them is ruled by one of the planets. It is clear that the fairies, in their magical control of things, are clearly Neptunian. And it is clear that the theatrical hand laborers are Jupiterian, especially Bottom, who is Jupiter-like in his extroversion. And there's all kinds of things to indicate that Theseus and Hippolyta have a lunar rulership. I'm way out of my notes now. We know that Hippolyta was a queen, an Amazonian queen. And astrologically, there really is only one queen, and that is the moon. Theseus, like all Athenians, is ruled by Athena. And Athens is sacred to Athena, and Athena is one of the names of the moon. So it's pretty clear that the rulership designation and all of the aristocrats coming under that lunar designation are like the moon in Cancer. But this kind of thinking doesn't get us very far. It's engaging, and it can be a key that opens up some doors, but it is again one of those very ostensive kinds of things. You know, symbolism can be like that. For a long time, you have to scratch through all of these amazing connections and the symbolistic language that is a language all of its own. But eventually you have to get to something more fruitful. However, in examining the components of the triple homecoming in terms of the cycle of Persephone, the nature cycle of the ethers withdrawing into the earth and then coming back out and being at their height at midsummer, and seeing that cycle relative to the yet higher cycle of the Christ and the life spirit, this will all indicate something very significant. The moon's rulership in Cancer indicates copious fertility. That's what summer's like. It's the obvious protectiveness of nature that it produces with riotous abundance, and life just propagates more life, so that no matter how harsh the winter, one can be sustained. There is some reference to Jupiter's exaltation, which compounds the fruitfulness and especially the generosity. But Neptune is a spiritual planet, and we have to look somewhere else for the meaning. So let's look at some pairs. If we look at the moon and Neptune, we find that there is no more imaginative combination of planets than the moon and Neptune. This is the height of imagination. But the moon and Neptune in this shared station bring out a special kind of quality of imagination. That is a graphic, pictorial imagination. Imagination doesn't have to be in specific pictures. We've been spoiled by photographs and things like that to think that it does. Neptune normally prefers the creative, the more nebulous imagination that we find in the clouds of Pisces, and out of those clouds it is able to magically concretize things. This is why it has a special technique, the ability to project or reflect images in Cancer. One of the greatest suggestions to our imagination comes from nature, especially watery nature. Just walking through a woods, just for 15 minutes or so, it's just so many different types of plant life, shapes and forms, and all working in harmony, that if you look at them and look at them, it's like one time I went to Carlsbad Cavern. I spent 3 hours walking into Carlsbad Cavern. It was one of the weirdest experiences of my life. I don't have quite enough energy to go into it all the way, but there were so many crystalline formations that, and I was working with such concentration on them, that my imagination was exhausted by the time I got to the depth of the cavern. Fortunately, there are distractions in nature, because there's no way that we could keep up with all of the things that are suggested to our imagination just from the plant kingdom alone. Water itself presents us with almost infinite forms for imagination. There are tides, and within the tides there are waves, and there are waves on the waves, and with the wind there are ripples on the waves, on the waves, on the tide. I love to go to Ferry Bluff and overlook the river and see the waves with the ripples, and then the ripples on the ripples, and it's like what a abstract artist always wanted to do but can never do with all of that life It's that it's an ever-changing picture. It is the same if the water is calm. There is then a different kind of imaginative activity, and that is reflected images. If we look in the water, we see what is on the other shore of the water. We see it reflected. Everything is inverted, or mostly everything is inverted. Sometimes it's slightly broken up and an image is broken into many pieces. Sometimes it's broken up in such a way that you can see many images of the same positive reality. This is all very lunar in that it has a reflective lunar quality. It is very abstract, like the Jupiter has abstraction, and it is very Neptunian because there are hidden meanings behind it, or there are truths that come through the reflection. Now that brings us directly to this whole summer solstice aspect of our theme and the stations of the other cycle we're looking at. That is the life cycle and how it is carried out through the life of Christ. When the cosmic representative of the life spirit, which to some is called the Buddhic plane, we call that representative Christ. In the East, it's called Vishnu. When that was focused, as some say, directly into the body of Jesus, it had interesting things to say about this stage, the midsummer stage of the cycle. It said, I go to prepare a place for you. Where I go now, you cannot follow, but you will in a while. Christ also says, in lieu of me, I give you the Comforter, which is the human spirit. And Christ also says, if I be lifted up, I will draw you unto me. Since the spring equinox and Easter, when the physical king was slaughtered by those jealous of his divinity, whether proclaimed or not, when he took the daring step of crossing the Rubicon, or when the sun crosses the equator at the Easter time, it passes over. Between then and midsummer, things have changed. For a while, a spirit appeared ghost-like, whether it was Julius Caesar or Jesus Christ. It worked ghost-like from the inner worlds. Eventually, it ascends up through the spiritual worlds to its home. And this is the grandest sense of a marriage of a representative spirit with the spiritual world in a homecoming that we as humans can comprehend. In Christianity, it is called the Ascension, and the resulting giving of the Comforter to us is called the Pentecostal experience. Ascension is a Jupiterian phenomenon. Our whole descent into matter, whether it be for the desire for a new experience in a current rebirth, or whether at the beginning of the whole cosmos, was initiated by Saturn. Whether it be cosmic or whether it be personal, the ascension is ruled by Jupiter. The involutionary and evolutionary descents are in some respect then associated with the northern and southern gates. These southern gates ruled by Saturn and Capricorn, and Jupiter exalted at the northern gates. Baptism by the Holy Spirit, or the receiving in Pentecostal fashion of the human spirit, which in Hinduism is called having a permanent tongue of flame at the crest of the head, is a phenomenon that is Jupiterian, Neptunian, and solar. All of the qualities of the Holy Spirit in the East, that is the Shiv principle, all of the symbols of Sun, Neptune, and Jupiter are found in the symbolism of Shiv. The Sun, in that it is a birth into the self. But that self is a spiritual being, so that is ruled by Neptune. And it occurs in the region of ideational thought, which is Jupiterian. So this marriage that we're talking about of the representative of the life spirit or of the Buddhic plane returning home, irrespective of whether one believes in the specific incident of Jesus, is tied together with this phenomenon of self-knowing in the highest kind of individual self-knowing. Looking at it as we are looking at it, we are saying that the possibility of knowing ourselves comes because we have had the experience of the incarnate, as much as can be understood, of the life spirit right before our consciousness. And as it withdraws and ascends back to its own home, we, in following it as far as we can follow it, when it is withdrawn from our being, we then understand our true self-nature, our true spiritual being relative to that universal spirit. Hence, we are drawn into the truth knower, the human spirit, because of having seen or experienced, even in a very small way, the pure, unconditioned truth. Had this remained with us all the time, upliftment would have been impossible, and self-knowing would not have been possible. This is an extremely important point. Unless we place our attention on and in that which is beyond self, there is no hope of getting beyond ourself, or of even having a healthy understanding of ourself. We must follow into that which goes beyond ourselves to even become ourselves and know ourselves in a transcendental way. There is no other way. However, the experience or the local way that we come to that experience of the unconditioned truth may vary quite a bit according from individual to individual, society to society, and so on. What we are talking about with Midsummer or Pentecost is classically called the experience of the Northern Gate. This is why the play is a comedy. The experience at the Northern Gate is pure joy. You know yourself beyond any limitation, and you know beyond yourself that there is something beyond it. That's a summertime experience. Everything is beautiful. Everything is rich. But that joy can never be completely comprehended without the experience of the southern gate. That is the winter's tale. Now, what's going to follow is very deep, and it's also very immature. It's a new line of thought for me. I've thought about it in the past, but I'm trying to go more specifically into it. Charlotte G. and I are beginning to focus on a study of the northern and southern gates. Only he's way ahead of me. It's something that is both in classical Christian and Hindu mysticism. However, the more ancient and Eastern teachings focus much more on the northern gate, and they orient to the east, that is, to the Orient. Modern mystics are focused much more on the southern gate, and they orient. It sounds almost like the to the west. Sounds almost like the Players, hot ice. So we're going to go into something that may take me lives to explore. Now, this is one of those things that has many, many flip-flops. Just when you reach what appears to be a firm conclusion that you can stand on, you find that firm conclusion is a passage to an opposite meaning on another level. And when you deal with things that are manifest to us in cycles, like the annual cycle that we're talking of, you run into things like that. It's almost like circular arguments. This phenomenon, or this idea that we're trying to get to, is indicated in reflection. And like the reflection on the surface of a lake, it is inverted. And things are inverted according to perspective, and they are proportioned according to perspective. That is, if you're standing closer or further from the lake, what is inverted and what is seen is different. In fact, even the size varies according to what your perspective is. It's very much like looking at a mirror. Some things are reversed, but not everything. It all depends on the perspective of your eyes. Christ said, "Where I go, you cannot come now. Eventually, but not now." Currently, the experience of the life spirit is different for us and for Christ. Not Jesus, but Christ. Because we are always looking from the cosmological southern gates. We are always locked in matter. And when we're looking from matter, we're always looking outward, and we only see the outward material perspective. If we have an experience that is truly inward, and that is more from the moon, Neptune, Jupiter character of the Christ in the life spirit, we have something that is disorienting. It almost knocks a person out. We are always looking up from a pit, the pit of materialism, no matter what the season. So you can say, like, we're at a perpetual winter, at perpetual southern gates. However, from the Christ perspective, Christ is always looking down, always looking in. When there is an ascension, or when your home is in a realm of pure spirit, and everything is purely universal, everything is within. But you don't see it with an outer surface, you only see the within of it within. It's a very, very different consciousness. Extremely Neptunian kind of consciousness. So this gives a new meaning to the proportion and perspective of a play within the play. When the aristocrats are looking down at the players, they are effectively looking from a Christ point of view. And what they should be doing is looking from within. Theseus is successful in that he does look positively. He does look down with the intent saying, if I be drawn up, I will draw others up after me. I think the best expression of this came many years ago. I love Dostoevsky. I've read almost all the major works, 10 or 12 of them. And in a book called The Insulted and the Injured, there is the protagonist telling the story as well as participating is a young man that is a bastard of an aristocrat. And it's spring, and he's running from one place to another, and everything is mud and water standing in it, and it's ruts and everything else. And he's running along, and he sees this old grandmother, this babushka, and she has a grandchild that is just learning how to walk. And they're out in this. And the child is falling in the mud repeatedly, and the young man is astounded at the grandmother. The grandmother is laughing. And the laugh shocks him so that he just says, this must be how it is for God. God must see us tripping and falling and sullying ourselves, knowing full well that someday we'll walk, we'll run, and we'll even dance. And that is what Theseus tries to do in this play, and that is literally what the Christ does. Leontes, in The Winter's Tale, was a pathological introvert. He had to be. He had that Saturn character, because that's what A Winter's Tale is like. Bottom, who is the true hero of this play, is a braggartly extrovert, which is what you have to have for a hero of a Southern Gate play. This is perfectly fitting for winter and summer solstices or the southern and northern gates. For us in materialism, we see only the outside. Everything is extroverted, and especially in our science. The ancient people who still had some of the atavistic, involutionary spiritual consciousness, the truth for them was inside, and the outer world was illusion. For us, in the depths of the southern gates, the inner world is illusion. That's all just crazy talk. And the outer world is where truth is. As we have said, from the view of the life spirit is the first proceeding inward and upward realm where everything is inward. Everything is inward. It's heartening to know now that the modern cosmologists, even in their materialism, when they say that the universe is flat, they don't talk about something outside of the flat universe, because there's no theory that can conceive something outside of that, so everything is within. That's a heartening note to take. Consequently, because we are in matter and so extrovertive, we look at the Ascension and the Pentecost, or at Midsummer or the Northern Gate, from an inverted point of view. For us, the joy of Midsummer is the extroversion and all of the plenty of nature and not having to be cold. For Christ, it is the return to the first aspect of the universal spirit with no confinement from limitation. Because of this, we can't experience the ascension ourselves in the right way. We have to take Christ as something outside of us, an outer being that we emulate or that we imitate, and thus we look up. We're still uplifted, as Dante was uplifted by looking at Beatrice in his beatific ascension through the different heaven worlds, but we're looking at something outside of us. So there is a reflective removal. And we have more of our joy in the reflection than in the spiritual reality. Very briefly, let's try to get into the Christ-I perspective. In one of the earlier talks, we said that Helena acted in Christ-like fashion by sacrificing what she wanted, even while she still actively wanted it. And she won. She got what she wanted because it was what she needed, but she didn't get it by wanting it. She got it by sacrificing it, and she got it from an agency beyond her that gave it to her. That's very much a Christ-like perspective. All of creation, even the conception of any idea or the idea of creation itself, from the life spirit, could be seen as a sacrifice. It is a sacrifice because if the life spirit identified with even the conception of an idea, that would mean that the life spirit was then identified with it, and it could no longer be the life spirit. So it is by sacrificing and perpetually sacrificing the ideas of creation and sustaining them with life that it gains, it does so by perpetual sacrifice. By saying, I am not this, it realizes its more unconditioned state of light in life and love. And because of that not this is conceived as an idea, and that idea is sustained by that life. It's a very difficult concept, but it's we want to talk about the ultimate sacrifice of the life spirit. The ultimate sacrifice of the life spirit was to enter into the creation to its very depths, even the depths that have been willfully perverted by our selfish consciousness, which destroys nature and the creation. That is saying that the life of the life spirit, by intention, it doesn't identify, but it can and does in sacrifice enter into limitation. It enters into the very things it sacrificed from itself to become itself, and by entering into it, it is a sacrifice on a sacrifice. That's again a very difficult conception. It entered into the very essence of life, entered into what is called death. Not merely our death of a physical body, but death from the universal life, the universal unity of truth. That's a very, very big thing. This is not only the sacrifice of its essence, it is a sacrifice squared, or a sacrifice compounded. It is sacrificed to its things so that its sacrifices can live. This is so hard for me to understand, and it's such a profound thing that I'm going to just try and give you a brief idea of it. The factuality or the history of this, as profound as it is not limited by myths and philosophies or theologies, though all religions have addressed it. It isn't limited to the Christ myth, isn't limited to Christianity. Let's try and look at one little facet of it, and in doing that, let's look at it through a very valid question. How did the resurrection affect the consciousness of the life spirit? We know how it has affected our consciousness and continues to, and it's like the awakening of an idea and something that is beyond an idea that is dawning on us over centuries. But how did it affect the life spirit itself? That question is, again, how did the resurrection affect the consciousness of the life spirit? You could just as well say, how did it affect the spirit of the Buddhic plane? Because the question is a valid question whether or not we accept Christ Jesus as the central incarnation. There are students of other religions that talk about this as a successive thing called the incarnations of Vishnu. Whether Christ Jesus was the central one or not, it doesn't make any difference. The question is still the same, because the phenomenon and the reality is still the same. That is, when the life spirit enters into death, enters into what is essentially not its nature, how is it changed when it returns to what is its nature? So we're going to take a simple example that we alluded to in the beginning of this talk: objectivity. The life spirit, being pure truth, is considered the first of the objective realms. Now this is a big statement. This implies that all of nature and all of the laws of nature, most of which are found in the region of ideational thought, are subjective relative to the total objectivity of life spirit. This means that Chard's beloved mathematical ideas and their foundations are subjective. They're not subjective necessarily in the sense of being arbitrary determinations or definitions, but they're subject more in the way that one can say the same mathematical truth many ways. One can speak about a truth geometrically or algebraically or trigonometrically, and each of them comes to an identity. They're talking about the same truth. But each of them, for all of its to us, great objectivity is still only part. The true objectivity would be all of those ways of stating the same thing plus the ones that we don't even know yet. And that true objectivity would be more than all of those parts. We can't even know all of the ways that the same thing is said. In a very awkward and reflective way, one can say that objectivity consists of all of the subjective views of it. But then the Zen folks would come in and say that objectivity is that and not that too, and we couldn't argue with that. This supposes that if pure objectivity were to take on the conditions and limits of subjectivity to their very depth, this means that truth would have to assume and accept doubt and disbelief. That is, the truth were to doubt its own being and its own life, and therefore it would experience death. Then suppose that that focus of objectivity was to face the truth in the undeniable way that we have objectivity in this world. We have an extremely limited objectivity in this world. We can only look at one thing in one way at one time, and we can measure it and we can test it, and it becomes indubitable. And it is an objectivity that thrives on and is made possible by doubt and limitation and all of those deathly qualities. Then suppose that consciousness of the little objectivity, the truth that is learned through a lie, assume that were to ascend back to an objectivity even beyond our ability to abstract. This would mean, in the general consciousness, an ascension to an objectivity where all of the opposites blend, the truth and not truth, and that all of the things of history would live in a small objectivity with the same veridity as the pure life that is none of them, that they would all live simultaneously. And it would be like the sacrifice of a sacrifice resulting in a compound objectivity. This is a cosmic deja vu experience that is astounding. I can barely even deal with the ideas, and the ideas are reflections of a very, very stupendous reality, but an objectivity objectified by what it is not because it has sacrificed itself to its sacrifice, is an experience that is cosmically unprecedented. And the ironic thing about it is that it occurs in a realm where time and precedence don't matter. Now, this is just a very simple, almost misstatement because it's so shallow and so incomplete example. It's the best that I could muster. But just think of the phenomenon of what it means in all of the other character of the life spirit. Love. Just think what love has become because of the spending on love that was already spent for. I don't know how to say it in any other way. It is a profound, profound thing how our lives and universally how the universal life has been influenced by the interaction between the spirit departing from the northern gates and going to the southern gates and returning back to the northern gates. Now, the unusual thing that I came across in this is for quite a few years now, I have been working with the idea of the realization of the dream, saying that all of this began as an imagination, a dream, and that within the unknown there was the potential for becoming, and that by projecting the known as a dream into the unknown as a creative dream and doing it for keeps, that in that process, when we lived it out as though it were true, in that when it was an ultimate life or death struggle, that in the giving of all to everything, it did take more of the unknown in that interaction into the truth, and the dream became realized. The interesting thing is the ascension at the northern gates is actually playing doubts for keeps and losing and winning in the losing. It's a really, really profound thing. And the beautiful thing is that we're participating in this. And it's something that we can find in our lives, and by paying attention to it, by following the leader, by following the light back, we come into our own, and it becomes a wondrous Midsummer Night's Dream. And so next fall, we will complete this sub-series by looking at Hamlet, and we'll have looked at the entire cycle then, and then we'll go on to another sub-series about magic. Thank you very much. Somebody must have been doing something because I quit coughing.